Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's session, which is State of the Industry for 2026. We're going to be talking about the risk, the shifts, and those numbers that really mattered the most. In case we haven't met before, we haven't had the pleasure of meeting. My name is Holly Foxworth. I am a registered nurse and I am the Vice President of Marketing and Communications here at Axiom Medical. And I have the pleasure of being your host today for this webinar. So we're thrilled that you joined us for that. I hope that you've come ready to learn without even realizing that you're going to learn, because today's session is extremely interactive. You guys play a huge part in what's going to be going on. We like to do it that way. We don't like to preach at you. We like for you to communicate with us, so that works really well. But today's not about theory. It's actually about what's happening within some of the organizations right now. We're going to look at what's changed, where, what's increasing in terms of risk. We're also going to look at those numbers that are really telling us about where organizations are thriving and where they may be exposed a little bit. And I would also challenge you to ask yourself, if you had an injury tomorrow, does your program protect you? So we have a fantastic panel of speakers that are going to be joining us today. We have Dr. Scott Cherry, who is our Chief Medical Officer with Axiom. We also have Dara Wheeler, who is our Chief Marketing Officer and EVP of Product. And we also have a new face that's joining us on the webinar today, which is Stewart Levy. He's the Vice President of Population and Occupational Health at WellWorks for You. So thank you all three for joining us today. And you guys will be able to meet them momentarily after we go over what you're looking at there on your screen. So start thinking of some of those questions that you want to be asking. To kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at, because I realize your screen it kind of looks busy there, but what I want to draw your attention to first is to that first right-hand side at the top in the corner. And what you're going to see is that's your RSVP button. And that is how you can get signed up for next month's webinar. We're going to have it on the 23rd, and that will be at 1:00 p.m. Central. The name of that is actually called the Critical Hour, and the one call that can prevent a recordable injury. So we have the Sherman-Williams team that's going to be joining us for that one, along with their account manager. They're fantastic. So if you are anybody that's responsible for reporting on outcomes, you definitely want to make for sure that that you are there for that one. So all you have to do is press that button. You'll automatically be registered. You don't have to fill anything else out, and it'll all be taken care of. You'll get a calendar invite. Just to let you know, also, we are issuing SHRM certification credits today. And to qualify for that, you need to remain on the webinar for the remainder of the hour and complete the survey at the end. Once you've done both of those things, you can download your survey, you can download your certificate, and you'll be ready to go at that point. The other thing I'd like to say is that I like to give a lot of gifts away. I really like to do follow-ups, and I love giving gifts. So I usually look at who has been the most attentive and who has been the most interactive during these sessions. And I handpick, I go through and I handpick and look and follow up directly with you after these so that we can send you a special gift, because we appreciate your participation. And like I said, this is all about you. We want you to be able to communicate with each other. If you have a story that you want to share, if you have a question that you want to ask while we're going through things, anything that you want to put in there, you are more than welcome to. At the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that there is several different things. There's going to be a resource section, and that has everything from today's slide deck to additional resources. There's especially some resources there for from WellWorks that talk about total worker health. Anything that you would need related to this subject, along with additional subject matters, you're welcome to access any of those that are there. And I think that we even included an additional webinar if you're needing additional information, and you're welcome to share. any of these webinars, they're on demand. So if you miss something, don't worry about it. You can catch it on the replay. But if you have something that you want to share, if you watch today and you want to share that with a colleague that you have so that they can earn certification credits as well, you're welcome to send them the link and they can do that online on demand. So one of the other pieces at the bottom is our engagement hub, and that will take you to a place where it has all of our webinars from the year. So if you're looking at a specific topic, last month we talked about marijuana. I think the first month we had talked about OSHA, some of those regulations that we were going on there. So anyways, if you want to see any of those, that is where you can find that is there in the engagement hub. And one thing that is very new, this is brand new here, is our new community that we've created. You should see a QR code that's there, or some information that's right there about our new Facebook community. It's called the Axiom Signal. And so we actually launched that at our summit this last week. And that is a place where you guys can continue this conversation. You can ask questions. You can share among colleagues. If you're facing a particular challenge, maybe you want to hear the recommendations of others that are working in your same industry on how it is that they're facing that. So there is that resource that's available. And I will also tell you that for the first person that joins and posts a question in there, I will personally send them a new North Face backpack for that. So there's definitely a lot of incentive to get involved. We want to make for sure that you have a place where you can communicate some of that. So let's go ahead and introduce our panel, and then we'll get started. Dr. Cherry, we'll start with you. Dara will follow you next, and then Stewart will have you go right after that.
Thank you, Holly. My name is Scott Cherry. I'm Axiom Medical's Chief Medical Officer. My professional background is I'm board certified in preventive medicine, public health, and occupational environmental medicine. I've been supporting the U.S. military, corporate, and industrial operations for the past 20 years, and it's been a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Cherry. We appreciate you being here. Dara?
Hi, everybody. Great to meet all of you or see all of you again. My name is Dara Wheeler. I'm Axiom's Chief Marketing Officer. Been with Axiom for 20 years, and I really love working with all of our customers and having these conversations. And this really is a conversation, like Holly said. We already see the attendee chat and the Q&A going, so please jump in with questions, comments. It'll be a lot of participation, and Holly really does give presents. So keep it up, and we'll send those out to you, and you'll get a nice little present from the Axiom team. Thank you all.
Absolutely. And Stewart, how about you?
Yes, I'm Stewart Levy. I am Vice President of Population Health and Occupational Health for WellWorks for You. We are a corporate wellness company that serves about close to 1,000 employers and about 2 million lives. I personally am a registered pharmacist, master's in business administration, and have had over 3 decades now in servicing clients in a corporate wellness career myself.
That is fantastic. And I think that your knowledge of total worker health today and how we can tie that in with some of the topics that we're going to be discussing is going to be such a value add. So let's go ahead and get started. The first question that we'll start with, and we're talking micro trends and case volume here. So the question is, what percentage of workplace cases do you think are resolved at a first aid level without escalating to a medical or legal claim? And so your answers there, your options are 30 to 40%. We have 50 to 60%. We have 70 to 80%, and then we have 90% plus. So type those answers there in your attendee chat, and let's see what you come up with, and then we'll reveal what we see. See 50 to 60, we've got some 75s, 80s, okay. Oh, we've got a 90. Interesting, okay. Well, here is the big reveal. The actual is 73.7, so that is about every 3 out of 4 cases. So Dr. Cherry, do you want to talk us through kind of what you see from that perspective and what you think is important?
Certainly, and I would say that statistic is with really a formal case management service managing those cases. Equally as important to point out is that when we consult with new clients, they may actually have that ratio of first aid or workers' comp claim incidents flipped. So 75% actually will go into the workers' comp system, and only about 25% are at the first aid level. And so there's really this huge value proposition just by having a process that is actively managing these cases as early as possible. And so when we look at our internal data here, our overall system efficiency across all of our clients is near 75%. So 3 out of 4 cases are kept out of this medical legal escalation. And if those, that term may not be familiar with you, but workers' comp is essentially a legal system to manage workers' comp claims. And it's kind of the designated resolution for workers' illnesses versus kind of the traditional civil legal pathway. And again, we see kind of the reverse happening in large organizations that aren't actively managing it. And so more interestingly, as we move into seasonality trends, we see actually almost the majority of claims coming kind of late summer to early fall. And that makes sense in a way that something we've learned about in the last couple of years is how heat actually affects all causes of injuries. Obviously, we've been tracking heat stress injuries for years, and we're aware of that. But over the years, we've decided to look into this more in depth, and there's actually a fairly significant literature supporting that heat elevation actually causes all injuries to be elevated. And so that's why we see this seasonality trend, which is very consistent with the medical literature. And something more interesting on top of that is our average case duration is just under 5 days. And so when we look at the winter spring timeframe, we do see an average duration that's longer, ranging from 5.5 to 6 days. So about a 20% increase.
Yeah, definitely. Dr. Cherry, it looks like there's some additional questions that have came in that are really good. They make a lot of sense. And they were asking about these percentages. Does this cover, is this nationwide, or how would you rate that? Some were even mentioning Las Vegas. Do you feel like that they would be different in different locations?
There can be some variability across the geography and within just the different clients based on their type of work, their level of safety, culture, sophistication. One of the biggest actually indicators for first aid resolution rates are actually early reporting. And so it's really good to know kind of the Axiom benchmark. We actually talk about national data that's reported from a couple different sources that are published as well. So you can get insights into that. But you actually that's a great question, because you really care about what's happening in your population. And so the point is to understand some benchmarks and then see where you're excelling or maybe lagging, and then looking at drivers that can change that performance.
Totally.
To just piggyback on what Scott said, about kind of the looking at the variability, our client base and the data we're looking at is across all regions in North America, and the variability is more to the timely reporting than it is regionally. So we have a lot of clients in those extreme heat scenarios, in Las Vegas and West Texas and various points of the year. We actually can track very closely to some of those locations in West Texas and some of these other extreme areas around predictability and volume at various times of the year because of the heat. But what we see from an outcome perspective is the outcome is driven by early reporting, not by the region. So as long as you have, and to Scott's point, the culture of safety, the culture of early reporting, and the psychological safety around driving that kind of culture, you don't see as much variability in the outcomes as you do in the predictive components around early reporting.
Agree. Dara, understanding that nearly 3 out of 4 then can be prevented, what would you say from a system perspective? What does that tell us about organizations that are managing injuries today versus how they should be managing them to get the better results?
Yeah, I think Dr. Cherry mentioned this a little bit. When we work and kind of look into data with new customers, with prospective customers, with the industry, usually you kind of see the flip. Usually you see 30% kept at that kind of self-treat first aid outcome resolution. And the biggest driver, there's a lot of components to culture and driving that safety experience for employees. There's ways to do that really thoughtfully. A lot of our clients, as a part of implementing Axiom, are trying to really be thoughtful in driving some of those cultural shifts. But that indicator, the reason early reporting becomes such a key driver of the outcome is if you think about the net benefit of an employee feeling like they can report early and can feel comfort. And I always describe it as, you see the signs up in the workplace that say, 5 days since last injury, 30 days since last injury. And when you think about that kind of mindset of being the employee to raise your hand to bring that back down to 0, that's a really hard culture to encourage early reporting, because you know that you don't want to be that person to bring the 30 days down to 0. But if you build that kind of muscle in workplace reporting, what you end up seeing is a net benefit that the more people get encouraged to early report or quickly report, the safer the business gets, because people start feeling encouraged to call out hazards, call out other potential incidents. And so you see this really positive net benefit from a reporting standpoint, and those total injuries drive down. So not just the outcomes driving and improving, but the total injury experience driving down.
Absolutely.
Just to add to that quickly, because actually I've really kind of, I think we're really realizing the value of early reporting. We've always known it, but as we keep looking at the data at the population level, it's probably the #1 predictor or leading indicator for optimum outcomes for cases. And so you can almost consider it your #1 leading indicator for the outcome of a case. But when we think of safety culture, it's actually now also a lagging indicator, right? So I would say this is something that really every organization should be tracking actively, even across different work sites or regions within their own data, because I think it's the most controllable, highly predictive and effective way of having the best outcome for your injured employees and for your overall program. Whereas a lot of times, many other factors like engineering out hazards or even administrative controls are much more burdensome from either a cost perspective of capital, or just change burden within the workforce.
Absolutely. I love the comment that just came in that said, "You see, you own it. Speaking up for safety works." Yes, you are exactly right. Stewart, I was going to come to you and ask you kind of from a total worker health perspective, from that standpoint, how should leaders be thinking differently about early intervention, not just as injury management per se, but overall as workforce performance?
Yeah, great question. So I heard a couple great things just in the last few minutes. I heard about culture. The equation wellness equals safety has been proven by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and NIOSH with the total worker health model, in the sense that early risk identification can really help, mitigate injuries. So for instance, individuals that are obese have a 2 times higher injury rate, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics. Diabetics, 5 times more workers' comp. Smokers, 4 times the risk also for injury. So identifying risk early on can be really important. So within the safety programs, if wellness becomes part of the culture and part of the educational learning programs, then it gives an opportunity to bring in industrial athlete programs, health screenings, and also health coaches that can really help workers, guide them towards a healthier lifestyle to be more productive and mitigate any potential injuries as well.
Absolutely. And that's what we're all aiming for, isn't it? Perfect zen there. All right. We ready to go to the next one? Next question up. So this is a hot topic. So top 10 injury types. And the question is, what percentage of workplace injuries do you think are sprains and strains? Do you think that would be 20 to 29%? Could that be 30 to 39%, 50 to 59%, or 60% and above? And we'll let you answer there in the chat. Let's see what your thoughts are. I'm seeing a lot of 60 plus.
Holly, is this Axiom percentage of sprain strains, or is this the population, total population?
Total population, yeah. Looks like we've got a lot of 60s that are there, 59s, 60s, etc. Yeah. All right, well, let's go to the reveal. Reveal is sprains and strains account for 57% of injuries. So that's over half of the injuries that are occurring in that area, just in that one category. So what that tells me is that this is not random. This is something that's predictable. Going back to your total worker health perspective, these are the things that you can work on in advance to prevent some of these things. Dr. Cherry, I was going to ask you kind of from a clinical perspective, why do you think that sprains and strains are still dominating the majority of injuries that are occurring, and why do they take longer to heal than others do?
Yes, the sprains and strains have always been the dominant proportion of injury types. And when we look at our internal data, it obviously is the majority. And even looking at national benchmark data, it by far is also the majority as well. When we look at our specific client data, our clients are probably doing much more manual lifting than probably the national benchmark data. But also I would say we are seeing, we're literally at the tip of the spear at any early injury, right? So that's one reason why our outcomes are so good, is we're taking care of these at the earliest opportunity. And, additionally, it can be just from a the hierarchy of safety within industrial hygiene, where, if you can engineer out an exposure, you should, and that really eliminates all risk from that exposure. But it's really hard to eliminate out all lifting, reaching, twisting. And so that's why we're seeing this across both internal and benchmark data across the US. And I'll leave it at that, Holly.
So, Stewart, I'll come to you next and just kind of ask, so how does this connect to conditioning and the overall worker readiness that you had mentioned before?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point as well. Thank you for bringing it up. So, the one opportunity obviously is to mitigate injuries from happening, but, injuries happen just for any of us that are healthy or just normal or just through whatever happens at the workplace. And statistics show that a healthier worker, ones that are more flexible and ones that are healthier and healthy weight, BMI, actually respond back to coming back to work quicker and mitigate more serious injuries. So a sprain or strain would be, more minor for someone that might be healthier, that may just twist an ankle, versus someone that actually might lose their balance due to weight or poor conditioning and end up with a more serious injury as well. So I think, wellness in the total worker health model supports all the types of metrics that can improve, productivity, absenteeism, and keeping workers on the job as well.
Absolutely. I love these questions that are coming in. I'm seeing some that are asking about age and everything else, and we have those are coming in within the deck. So hold on, we're almost there. Let's go ahead and go on to our next section, which is body parts. So let's talk about body parts and which one you think. The question is, which body area do you think accounts for the highest percentage of workplace injuries? And so your options there are back, hands and fingers, knees, or multiple body parts. And when we say multiple body parts, that might be like, you fell down and you hurt your shoulder and your ankle at the same time. So what's your thoughts? I'm seeing knees, back, multiples, hands and fingers, lots of backs, it looks like. All right, I think you guys may be a little bit surprised on this one. Dr. Cherry, talk to us about why multiple body parts are actually the most.
Yeah, when you look at our internal data to benchmark data, they're roughly aligned, except multiple and back are kind of transposed, but otherwise they're fairly trending in the same direction. And really what I think is happening for like our internal data is the injuries, it can be from a slip, trip, or fall, or it can be from lifting. And so you have like a kinetic chain involvement, meaning like the low back, shoulder, hips, or knee, where there's multiple joints in place. And so obviously we're assessing any potential concerns. And in many ways, I would say that this doesn't, the disagreement between our data and the national benchmark data is not necessarily a concern. It's really saying the same thing. Also, a lot of times, if there's late reporting in the national benchmark data, then, a lot of the complaints may just focus on what's hurting the most, so to speak, that might reach the level of a workers' comp claim. And so, but still, again, it is where we are over-indexed on sprains and multiple body part injuries. And, hearing how the overall wellness of the population really does affect injury risk and then also healing, we do see the prevalence of like obesity and diabetes and some other chronic medical conditions really getting at very large levels. I think the current statistics would be, just to give some perspective to the audience, probably 10% of the US workforce or the US population is diabetic, and probably up to 30 to 40% is pre-diabetic. So hearing that statistic that diabetes gives you a 4x risk in injury, that's really compelling. Same thing with obesity. So what we like to talk about at Axiom is like a win-win-win. And I think wellness is absolutely a win-win-win for the employee, for the employer, and for the overall, the country, so to speak, right? So the healthier we can be, it lowers our risk of injury, and then it helps keep the workforce going and the country going.
Absolutely. I like that win-win-win. We may have to use that again. We may coin that phrase and have to use it again, the 3 W's there.
Okay.
Stewart, what is the signal about workforce health overall in what we're seeing here?
Yeah, I think the key is, we talked about culture, but also making it easier for the workers, that wellness is just part of their job and part of their lifestyle. And I think that's That's what we're seeing in many of our groups. So very simple app to monitor your stress level and monitor your sleep. I mean, we haven't talked about that, but one of the most important things is to have workers, present. And over 70% of all workers don't get either enough sleep or the quality of their sleep, obstructive sleep apnea. So a simple wellness program that can make it easy for the workers to access, tracking their sleep. We talked about heat and hydration, monitoring that. And also, of course, on a musculoskeletal side, there's very, simple technology that can help measure an individual's flexibility and create a virtual physical therapy program, again, to make it easy for workers to access corrective exercises so that they do it at home or do it at the gym, and they don't have to take the day off of work for a physical therapy appointment. So I believe, those are going to be the important things, as we've talked about, to help those workers stay healthy, stay on the job, and just make it easy. It's just part of their life, just like brushing teeth. And that's the real goal here.
Just like brushing teeth, you're exactly right. That is a perfect example. And I love one of the comments that came in that said, the weller the employee, the less distraction on the job for them, on the job, mental, physical, and spiritual. So I agree completely. And there was also
and Holly, we
about sleep.
Sorry, we also had a comment about stretch and flex, being something that athletes do before games. You would just, if you incorporate that, nobody thinks about an athlete doing that before a game versus an employee. Why would we ask employees to go do all these physically demanding jobs without having some of that same mindset? And Mike's question was, if they're working a 10, 12-hour shift, why not stretch more often throughout the shift to prevent conditioning issues or making sure that their muscles and their body are ready to operate?
Absolutely. I think I could use more conditioning myself. And maybe we need to add that to the agenda. Yeah, for morning meetings then. Let's go on to the next topic, which was actually another question for you guys. And this one's about delayed reporting. So the question is, what do you think workplace injuries are most often reported? When are they most oftenly reported? So your options there are, they're reported within the first hour, 1 to 8 hours, same day, or after 24 hours. Tell us what you think your employees are reporting. Are they doing it immediately? Are you seeing some that are straggling? Or do you have those that have an injury on Friday and then all of a sudden you don't hear about it until Monday morning? I'm seeing a lot of same day, 1 to 8 hours. That's encouraging news, definitely. Definitely. Dara, what would you say would give you the best outcomes there as a follow-up?
It's a trick question. I mean, if you think about how we've been seeding the conversation about earlier reporting, so the injuries that have the best reporting are the ones that were reported the fastest. So there's multiple reasons behind this. There's a lot of psychological reasons behind better healing patterns. The earlier an employee gets supported, but also physical healing. And so 1 hour, less than an hour, as soon as injuries occur, get them reported.
Absolutely. It is. It's that first hour is when we see the biggest difference. Dr. Cherry, what do you see in terms of whenever you look at injuries and the impact and like return to work and things of that sort, where do you see the biggest impact on where it is that employees are reporting and then what that outcome tends to be? Where do you see the correlation?
Yeah, so, when we look at our data, it's very, very compelling that if an injury is reported after 24 hours, it's much different than within 24 hours. And so we have, more nuanced data about within 1 hour, within 8 hours, and within 24 hours. But if the audience can really just take this home, that reporting an injury within 24 hours dramatically lowers the duration of the claim. And so after 24 hours, you're seeing about a 33% increase from 4.5 days to 6 days duration. And then that first aid resolution dramatically drops by 12%. So from, a 75% first aid resolution down to a 63%. Now, if we think about this from a first principles perspective, it really contradicts the logic. So in general, you would suspect a severe injury would be called in immediately and have the longest duration and the lowest first aid resolution. And the most minor injuries would be delayed to be reporting because people could kind of manage through them, or it's not so apparent how urgent it is. And those, on average, take 33% longer to resolve from a claim perspective and are much closer to a coin toss for first aid resolution. And so, and I love that the audience participates and kind of looks at what they remember, but there is also a phenomenon of recall bias. So like, you want to validate this with your objective data, let alone just your own recall. And what will happen is you will then have very actionable data to let you know, like where, how are we doing? Are we doing great? Or is there something to be improved upon? And, I think maybe just giving a little bit more detail about why reporting within the first hour is so important from kind of a medical perspective. So when we first get injured, our body will start to respond. Our immune system will actually respond to an injury and create inflammation. So you see the swelling, if it's a sprain or a strain or a laceration or, anything that's going on. And the longer time goes on without some first aid measures, you have exponentially more inflammation that takes, you kind of lose the ability to actually slow down or reverse that inflammation through first aid measures. And so that's why it's really so important from a medical perspective. And Dara brought up the psychological aspect. So a worker is going to pretty much work through injuries. It's just part of the bravado of being an American or just being human. And what happens though is once the adrenaline wears off, or once the day relaxes, or they get home and talk to a loved one and they're really in pain and they really don't understand what's to do next, they actually might start to catastrophize what's happening. And so then they might actually kind of over respond to going to the emergency room when they really just needed some first aid measures. And then lastly, from an employer perspective, the employer actually loses the window to provide some modified duty, so to speak, or just start managing it and providing all the resources that, an employer may have for their injured employee.
Absolutely.
So it might be a triple loss there,
Oh, you're gonna give a 3L there. So now we have the 3 L, 3 W's. Okay, we've got 2 coin phrases from the event. Stewart, I was going to ask you. You brought up culture before. So what do you feel like that? How does culture play a role in this? Like, does it feel like it's more behavioral or more perceived role in terms of when people are choosing to report their injuries?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a cultural thing. It's things that can be embedded into the safety and training programs. We're seeing a lot of more and more interaction with safety managers and individuals in the field that are actually there to help train and also obviously observe if someone is injured for early reporting. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that it's okay to ask and to be vulnerable and to be open. We see the same thing with workers who may have issues regarding mental health, which is a huge thing. So creating a culture that it's okay to share when you're injured, or it's okay to share to your boss that you're depressed because you had a loss of a loved one. It's all part of that mind, body, spirit, and creating a culture that it's okay to be yourself and to be able to be healthy, both mentally and physically.
Absolutely. Dara, anything you want to add to that in terms of why you think organizations may struggle to capture things in the first hour beyond what you already had said?
I think Dr. Cherry's point about more acute and less acute injuries are really important, because often we hear versions of both as being challenges. So either we'll hear, well, why would I report it to anybody if it's a 911 scenario, an emergency scenario, versus something that might be more like a sprain strain that could be resolved with first aid recommendations. But we're seeing the same type of outcome issues either way, and there's different reasons behind it, and sometimes there's different parts of the story. Often, we use this early reporting first aid resolution as a key component of outcome metrics, but there's a lot that nurse case managers and safety teams are doing that might not always show up in a stat line. So if you think about a more serious injury, sometimes it's life-saving scenarios. It's not the thing that's going to keep it at first aid that matters. It's the part about, a human life needing support. So to Stewart's point around the safety around feeling like you can talk to somebody, all of that builds into things that are actually become very life-saving, whether it's preventing harm of an employee for psychological reasons, or thinking about emergency scenarios and helping people continue to thrive in their lives. These numbers are always really great headline numbers, but sometimes the stories behind the humans involved gets lost in the first aid resolution story.
Very much so.
I'd like to add something really quick. Also, Holly, is something we've always talked about over the years is sometimes a small injury can become complicated because of the invisible past medical history of that employee that maybe the supervisor or the company is not allowed to know about. So a classic example we always say is a laceration in an uncontrolled diabetic has a much higher chance of getting an infection, which can be very, very costly. But based on Stewart's comments earlier about kind of the risk associated with like a diabetic becoming injured at 4x, we've been talking about this the last couple of client summits we've given, where there's actually headwinds for even sophisticated safety programs, because as their workforce, as their wellness declines in relation to higher prevalence of, again, obesity, diabetes, and other lifestyle or chronic medical conditions, their risk is actually increasing for injuries, even if their operations are static and the hazards are well controlled. So as Stewart quoted, again, diabetes have a 4x increased risk of sprains and strains or work-related injuries. So if the prevalence in a workforce doubles over a period of years, essentially that risk is dramatically increased in that population, right? And so there's these invisible headwinds that you may not be aware of, but we try to inform our clients this because it is something that the management and executive teams have to be aware of in their human capital planning.
Absolutely. I love
Holly,
all the comments. Yeah,
I was going to say some of these comments are great. One thing that I get reminded of too, when we talk about building culture and trust, there's ways to help encourage behaviors and try to drive and think about how we do this and incentivize the right behaviors and de-incentivize the ones we don't want. But often I've had situations where we might have really good behaviors that are rewarded and cultures, but if employees are coming from cultures that are not as open, sometimes you're undoing a lot of things that happen, nothing to do with your company, nothing to do with, you're dealing with a lot of fallout from maybe some other corporate structures or things that have been punished in the past. So even though as a company, you're doing the right things, you're encouraging psychological safety, you're training everybody on what to do, sometimes you're spending a lot of time undoing people's, I don't want to say it's maybe little t trauma, but little t trauma from prior jobs can sometimes weigh heavily on the way people manage.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. All right, so I've seen a lot of you asking, and you were talking about the difference in generations. So here comes the next question. So true or false, this is a big one. Older workers experience more workplace injuries than younger workers. Do you think that's true, or do you think that's false? I saw some opinions earlier about from the Gen X and Gen Z, how there's different, seeing lots of falls, some true. Yeah. All right, well, it looks like the majority of you are right. False. The younger workers tend to have a higher frequency, while the older workers tend to have a longer recovery duration. So, Dr. Cherry, do you want to talk through what that looks like and why that makes sense?
Yeah, and I'll just kind of date myself a little bit, but I was doing my master's degree in public health 20 years ago, and I was doing this analysis in federal workers' comp as an Army officer, and it has not changed. So essentially, younger workers are injured more frequently, but shorter duration or claim cost, and the mirror image to the over 40 cohort, where they're injured less frequently, but their claim is longer and more costly. And so you could probably do the multiplication to see what ultimately happens from a cost or an impact to the workforce perspective. And we kind of realize this, but there can be kind of like a healthy worker effect too, whereas if someone's been in the workforce for longer and longer, you know, they have, sometimes their duties become less strenuous, or there's cumulative traumas over the years that kind of adds to that more severe injury once they are injured. But I think what's kind of the quintessential example here is the 10-year risk profile, where in our internal data, but also in the national benchmark data, aside from, if you can only remember two things from this webinar, the first one is really early reporting, but the second one is your new hires, the people working less than 1 year. You really need to focus on them for mentorship and maybe extra warm-ups and work hardening. But the under 1 year tenured employee represents over a third of the injuries, and that's consistent across, you know, the tens of thousands of cases we do versus as well as the national benchmark. And I think that's just a very compelling statistic, and it shows really the at-risk population.
Absolutely. Michael brought up an interesting point. He had said younger workers also seem more prone to report those minor injuries. So it could be that there's a generational gap that's there. Stewart, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the big thing for us, obviously, is the older workers do have a higher risk profile for injury. So that's across the board in our book of business as well. You know, that's just very typical in what we're seeing. But at the same time, you know, from a wellness perspective, you know, different workers, everyone's got their own journey. So the older workers, what we're finding is they like more of a high touch approach, that they prefer having a coach or a mentor in the group. And that's also part of the culture, is to have, you know, buddies assigned that can encourage people to be active and do the stretching like we talked about, sort of like a team camp, than someone that's like just someone to stimulate their buddies and gals to be active. Whereas the younger workers, they like the ability to self-direct and using technology, which is logical. So what we see as our secret sauce when we're doing a total worker health and prevention program is to A, make it personalized, but B, be able to be flexible enough that if someone wants to deal with mental health and prefers to talk to a behavioral health coach, that we have that resource available. Whereas for someone else that may want to just be self-guided through an app and stress management tools that we provide through our software, then we have that available as well, or the combination is sometimes important.
Absolutely. And just continuing on that age risk profile. So the question here is, where do you think that organizations should focus the most prevention effort? Do you feel like that should be on new employees, experienced employees, leadership training, or in equipment improvements? I almost want to say that I think it could be all of the above. What do you guys think? Yes. All new employees, Jill, absolutely. Leadership training. Good points. Yeah. All right. So it looks like that you guys were, the majority of you were right whenever you talked about new employees. And I think that Dr. Cherry might have given you a little hint earlier in one of the prior slides, but definitely 34.5% of those injuries occur in the employees of the 1 year tenure. Dr. Cherry, I was going to ask you, do you feel like that we are at a place where we need to reevaluate what our onboarding and what our education is that we give to our new employees that come in?
I do, and obviously the statistic kind of, it kind of just on its face shows its impact, but more in depth to this statistic is, in general, if you look at a worker population at a company, maybe up to 20% of the population is in that less than 1 year tenure. So when you see a 35% injury rate in that population is 75% overrepresentative. It's almost double. And so really that is one of the low-hanging fruits. And I actually took the last question myself, and I was stumped between either new hires or leadership. And I was focusing, again, of my only two main points for this to take from for the audience is, leadership training for early reporting, because really those are the two most controllable things that, from my perspective, seem the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah. Stewart, where would you say that organizations should focus first, maybe on that total worker health perspective there?
Yeah, I think for us, it's really the leadership training, changing that culture where wellness equals safety and embedding in a safety program. The other challenge, just to bring it out to everyone that's out there, is we find that there's many silos, that the safety department in training isn't talking to the benefit side in HR, and even there's separate vendors. So on the safety side, on the healthcare side, you might have the risk management companies, brokers, and insurance, and on the benefit side might be the health and wellness part. So bridging the silos, the leadership between the organizations, that this is not only a total worker health solution to help workers, but it's an organizational culture, because 74% of when someone gets injured are the indirect costs of not having that worker on the job. So embedding the benefits program with wellness along with integration into safety can really help, not only on the medical claims side of things, but also on obviously the workers' comp, disability, and absenteeism productivity measures.
Absolutely.
You're speaking our language. I was like you were speaking our language. Somebody mentioned, Jeff, thanks for participating in the chat. Eliminating those silos has been really interesting. And the total cost of all of this does sit across so many different teams and departments. And to your point about different vendors, we see that too. And it's so interesting because if you think about how expensive health and injury care is within an organization, it's, besides payroll, probably the number one expense for most businesses is their insurance, both healthcare and comp spend. And it's really interesting because unless you get up to that, maybe that CFO office, sometimes those dots aren't being connected and the teams aren't always coordinating. And we see this in real time sometimes on calls where we're talking about our return to work program and safety, benefits, HR, everybody's looking at each other like, well, who's going to do this or coordinate or pay for any of it? And there's so many different reasons that the stakeholders should care, and they do care, but it's really interesting trying to coordinate across those silos sometimes and call out where the gaps are. And I think we end up in a place of, we're trying to make sure that we're supporting and being really good partners. We don't want people to feel like there's any degradation of their own jobs and that we're trying to enhance and help, but I can see those silos play out in real time sometimes.
Yeah. So Dr. Cherry, from a program highlights perspective, and this is just based on kind of our information. This is what we have produced ourselves. But what are your thoughts about the performance highlights? About what are you seeing? What sticks out to you the most? What recommendations do you have there?
So in general, our average case duration is 3 days shorter than the national benchmark. However, there's a huge asterisk I'll put there. So this 8-day national benchmark is actually lost work time cases. And so all of our cases that are kept at that first aid rate are actually 0 lost work time. So the impact is actually, thousands or tens of thousands of operational hours saved. And so the value, aside from just, not being OSHA recordable, early return to work, is actually unneeded lost work time. And that's absolutely huge for the injured employee. When you look at financial health of our populations, sadly, I think the majority are still struggling with their own financial health. And if they go out on workers' comp, they're only going to receive a 2/3 benefit. And so they potentially are on this spiral downward to even worse financial health. So that's fairly a tough doom and gloom stat. But one of the other very clear value propositions from a service like ours is, out of all of those cases we did last year, almost 9% were early identified as not work-related. So you have absolute clarity. The employee, the employer understand, hey, this is personal. Let's get this taken care of through your personal health benefits. And so that clarity provides so much value. That way people are not mixed up in the wrong process or program with workers' comp, et cetera.
Absolutely. Well, lastly, I would like to ask each of you kind of some final takeaways here. Dara, what should leaders do first whenever they leave today? What would you say that their first action plan should be?
I think the first, in terms of reporting early, is start incentivizing that, and then incentivizing the right things, not incentivizing the 0 days since last injury stat or the 30 days since last injury. Make sure that people see everybody kind of walking the walk and allowing for quick and early reporting.
Absolutely. Stewart, I'm going to come to you next. What does total worker health look like when it's done right?
It incorporates a lot of the great comments we talked about. It's a total organizational culture. It's tying in the benefits as well as the risk side of the business with all the vendors, getting everyone together to support the organization and the employees. And then the third thing is having metrics. Just like we talked about the silos, one of the opportunities is to share data that great organizations like Axiom have with the benefit side of the folks that we work with, the medical medical claims and the diabetics and all the high-risk individuals, and to identify those individuals that really need extra help and support and making sure that they're in some sort of program.
Absolutely. And Dr. Cherry, bring us home with our final recommendation here. What was, let's see, what's the biggest clinical mistake that you see organizations making?
Again, I think it's also delayed reporting. Because of OSHA since 1970, I think everyone is aware of doing the right thing, and it's coming through like workplace safety through, the hierarchy of controls with engineering, etc. But there's something we can do very simply to really affect the course of the average claim, and that's early reporting. And so even doing like near miss reporting may actually be like a warm up of sorts, and it could be a leading indicator for the safety culture. Your near miss to actual injury ratio, you should have some, your near misses should be much higher than your actual injury reports, and you can kind of track your safety culture that way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your participation. Again, I look forward to looking through all the comments and seeing just who interacted the most. And so you may be getting some love notes from me later on. And I also love Kane's question that he said, who's going to be the first? Who's going to be the first to kick it off in the Facebook group there? And get the backpack. So we definitely want to get that shipped out to you guys. But thank you for joining us again, and we look forward to seeing you next month.